Finnegans Wake flies along a plane of differences, exchanging valences, riding thitherways end to end, and turning, and end to end hitherways riding. As such, the presence of multiplicity and alterity is the feature of greatest interest and challenge to any interpreter of the work. One cannot help but reach, by some half-halted suggestion, some point on the page where one must put the book down and ponder its excesses of possibilities. The fuel that stokes this work's fire is its cinders, the leftovers from what seems some remote yet dazzling conflagration. Ahead of one lies the possibility of atomic fission, whereby disparate signifiers of all varieties meet in an act of hermeneutic scission, taking the text to task by singularly inflicting a hole in this textual hole, punching holes in space. Joyce's presence should impress us here only to the extent that it has become a phantom, a remnant and textual effect dreamed up by a textual world seeking an authoritative point de capitaine. For Joyce's world is one in which all are differing as clocks from keys, since nobody appeared to have the same time of beard. A radically disunified, decentered, chaotic, and dynamic universe, all discourses differing from one another, with no meta-discourse to unite them under one common truth or authority. Finnegans Wake is his royal diversion on the Runaway Ginnies, wherein Joyce has decidedly chosen to have fun both with the reader and at their expense. This is thus a world of challenge, opposition, and the interpreter must have a way marked by marks which do not guarantee the clarity they may seem to signal at first blush. Contrary to the malevolent Cartesian demon that critics have often painted Joyce as for choosing this seemingly sinister relation to his readers, Joyce approaches the reader, and therefore interpreter, as a lover. As such, when he writes that like is equal to an equal in this sound symmetry which is Liebes love, we should take Joyce as saying that despite the dizzying array of opposites which assails one should read this world of seemings as written by Liebes love, dear love. It is therefore essential that the reader confront the text with something of the ironic, liberal, jocular spirit that Joyce did. For to the extent that we can consider Joyce to be advocating a theology, it is a radically Nietzschean one, in which the only gods taken seriously are those who can dance, in which the coincidence of their contraries re-amalgamerge in that identity of undiscernibles. The Wake is a theology of the indiscernible differences which make up what is meaningful and what has been yet to be made meaningful. It is the testament of the rocks from all the dead unto some the living, in which what speaks are the drab, everyday, raw, often insignificant leftovers of both human society and nature. As scatterlings of a stone, both the signifiers of the text and we as readers of those signifiers are read as scat, that is, as animal droppings, and as the ejaculatory improvisations of a jizicious Joyce, expelled from his testicle, or stone, as jocular jism. In this chaosmos of Allah anyway connected, the cosmos of Allah has become rhizomatically chaotic, presenting an infinite array of possibilities in which anything has the potential to be meaningful and to be connected to any other point in the text. Finnegans Wake is therefore a site of radical reversibility, substitution, interpolation, and interplay, where we are asked to play in the interstices between the known and the unknown, balancing on a tightrope over the void of to be. The interpreter is therefore challenged with a unique literary creation, one that perhaps is only insofar as it remains a challenge to be properly appraised. The greatest challenge, as I have mentioned before, is the text's all-pervading multiplicity and alterity. Taken to its extreme, interpretation, many would believe, runs completely amok when confronting Finnegans Wake, leaving one with the scatterings of one's wits about them and no product to show for it, or at least not one that meets the conventional expectations of criticism. All standards of literary interpretation find both their test case and their demise in Finnegans Wake. Perhaps worst of all for the interpreter is its case of opposites. Now, to show what is meant by this, I shall take as a test case a single word from Finnegans Wake, for and this, I believe, is the radical potential of Finnegans Wake. If even one word can present us with such a hermeneutic roadblock that we must uproot the critical principles that result in an intractable reading, then so be it. On page 117, we find the phrase, any tongue at all. Squarely in the midst of chapter 1.5, the chapter most explicitly focused on problems of authority, delivery, mediation, encoding, signification, and reception, this phrase concludes an instructive passage about the sonicity and plurality of the Wake's language. Sending out portmanteau flourishes, the passage speaks of Wakies as polyglottal, sordomutics, floralingua, flay, flutter, and any tongue at all. Utilizing a wide variety of semantic associations, Wakies is said to use a variety of languages like an array of fluttering flora. And yet, it would seem that this passage not only describes the Wake's language that it does use, but also what it could in principle use. There is thus a sense of indeterminacy and probability when, upon reaching the conclusion of the sentence, we seem to be told that the Wake could be written in any tongue at all. And yet the phrase says so much more than that. For why would Joyce spell these words the way he does, if not for a reason, one that can lead to a radical hermeneutic shift if taken seriously? One of Joyce's most central preoccupations in Finnegans Wake is whether or not the pen is mightier than the sword. Through a rich series of symbolic substitutions, a number of objects come to stand for the pen and or the sword, enacting semiotically the discord between the two conceptually. The potency of these respective symbols is staged in a variety of ways to suggest the different historical instantiations of this duel between the power of ideas, narrative, art, and creativity on the one hand, and the power of material, institutions, violence, and persons on the other. This dualism, however, is ultimately intractable for Joyce. Neither yields absolutely to the other. At best, there are watershed moments, detailed amidst fragmentary vignettes, where one seems to win out. However, the relativity of this chaosmos refuses to give in to any signifier or object absolutely, insisting on the necessarily intertwined nature of all things. Thus, the symbols of pen and sword are pitted against each other with no resolution in sight. To enact this, Joyce writes any tongue as a mutation of the Wagnerian sword Notung. Contrary to Wagner and the corresponding German giant G.W.F. Hegel, whom Joyce sees as negating the richness of difference in an effort to subsume alterity under the system of grand narrative, the potency of the negating Notung becomes the affirmation of any tongue, basking again in the panorama of all floors of speech. As such, any tongue stages the two seeming opposites of pen and sword in an intimate, equiprimordial embrace, which challenges our ability to reduce any signifier which may suggest one pole to solely that one at the expense of the other. Therefore, the word any tongue maintains the subliminal valence of the buried signifier Notung, while at the same time subsuming it and affirming an alternative signification. And while this may sound like Hegelian Aufhebung or sublation, it is important to note that Joyce's semiotics does not yield to a historical progression guided by the dynamos of reason. Contrary to the Hegelian notion of dialectical synthesis, Joyce can be said to enact a dynamics of opposition without synthesis, posing and positing semiotic strife as the enduring, churning dynamic of a world without resolution. This may be all well and good. Even those apprehensive ones who approach the Wake with a cautious suspicion could get behind the suspension of synthesis. However, it is when we reach the word at all that our hermeneutic conventions reach their startling apotheosis. For up until now, what has been argued could be seen as just an argument for the Wake's polysemy, much in line with Joyce's writing early on, that every word will be bound over to carry 70 toptypical readings through the book of double-ends giant. But more than simply articulating an argument for polysemy, this paper confronts and evaluates the radical challenge of the word at all. On the one hand, pertaining to the most literal, surface-level meaning, one might render this as at all, making our phrase any tongue at all. And yet, an immediate look below the surface shows that everything interesting in this book is unseen and unsaid, unmarked yet significant nonetheless. As such, one must be sensitive to even the most superficial of suggestions, taking seriously the notion that Finnegans Wake is all about hearkening and play. Playing with the meanings as such, we might therefore render atoll as atoll, or a ring-shaped reef, island, or chain of islands formed of coral. Fertile and grounding on the one hand, remote and isolated on the other, the addition of this gloss adds a whole new dimension of rich associations which might suggest a number of meanings. Firstly, it might suggest the isolation of each tongue amidst a sea of different, foreign tongues. Secondly, it might suggest the idea that one's language is like a refuge, sheltering them and providing a small but native territory differentiated from the foreign that surrounds one. Thirdly, this might be naming an atoll, any tongue atoll. It is our final dimension of meaning, however, that provides us with the most intractable hermeneutic problem. Venturing into interlinguistic territory, we could render atoll as a tal, tal being German for valley. Taking advantage of the homophony between the T and TH sounds in German, the A is separated at the front. And at this moment, when it would seem our meaning has been made and our job as interpreters done, we are met with the radically charged valence of the signifier in Finnegans Wake. For we could equally as validly render atoll as a tall and a tall. The sign for the indefinite article a and negation, a with a dash, therefore coincide in an unsettlingly intractable orientation. For we cannot find any criteria by which to assure that a tall could not be substituted for a tall with equal validity. In other words, there is no reason we can't read atoll either way we want. More than interpretive challenge, this places us in interpretive catatonia. The reader who would hope to read the text in such a way that an authorized, synthetic, valid reading would result is met with the radical ambiguity of the signifier and the irrevocable alterations we make to the text in the process of interpretation. The only way to eliminate this problem is to bypass the rigid, artificial, literalist criteria that would necessitate a reading be a coherent entity unto itself. These readings, which focus on plausibility, coherence, realism, and logicality, prove entirely inadequate to interpret any tongue at all. The reader must therefore, as I suggested before, approach Finnegans Wake with something of the irony, jocularity, frivolity, and playfulness that characterized Joyce's approach. In doing so, one becomes a humbler reader and interpreter, tempering the claims of interpretation to provide a discrete meaning, valid and logical unto itself. Instead, the polysemy and, most importantly, the intractably ambiguous and conflictual nature of the cosmos is able to be beheld in its many hues, where every crowd has its several tones and every trade has its clever mechanics. The democratic openness of the text as an affirmative site of plural abode is laid bare by Joyce in this panorama of personal parts.